Hello and welcome to another podcast, this time on Ireland and Britain's relationship with it in the period 1951 to 2007. Let's start with a little bit of background. Nationalists and Republicans are those in Northern Ireland who want to belong to Ireland, and they're generally Catholic. Loyalists and Unionists consider themselves to be British, and they're generally, though not exclusively, Protestant. In the 1170s, Henry II oversaw a Norman invasion of Ireland, and by 1199 King John became Lord of Ireland. In 1286, the Great Charter of Ireland was 1216, the Great Charter of Ireland was set up a year after the Magna Carta of England. In 1297, there's a Parliament of Ireland set up for the Norman barons who were landowners in Ireland. By 1400, though, English authority had almost disappeared. In the 1500s, the Tudors reconquered Ireland, and by 1530, Henry VIII was declared King of Ireland. By 1607, the main earls, including O'Neill, had fled Ulster to Spain to try and get a Spanish invasion, which never materialised. From the 1607 onwards, there was the Plantation of Ulster. This was organised settlement by the Crown in England to prevent further rebellion after the rebellion of the Earls, because they couldn't trust the Catholics. This worked to an extent until the Civil War period, when massacres from both sides led to mistrust and fear between religions, and severe penal codes for the Catholics. Meanwhile, Scottish settlers were moving to Ulster, which is very close to Scotland, before and after the plantation. In 1690, the Battle of the Boyne confirmed Protestant rule in Ireland after the Catholic King James II, who was defeated there, but this stoked up religious tension even further, and that includes up to the current day, as in the Orange March is still done on the 12th of July, the anniversary of the battle. In 1800, the Act of Union meant Ireland was directly ruled by Westminster. The Irish potato famine of the 1840s saw massive emigration to America, but also saw Irish nationalism rise, as the British government were quite rightly blamed. Food was still being exported to England, whilst Irish people starved. Home rule, or a type of dominionship, was called for, but the House of Lords would not allow it. In the Parliament Act of 1911, it meant that any bill could be forced through the Lords, and so therefore the Home Rule Bill would possibly be one of those. This is when the Conservatives became the Conservative and Unionist Party, well, in 1912, a year after, in opposition to the Home Rule, and then they join with the Liberal Unionist Party and become the Conservative and Unionist Party. The Home Rule Bill was suspended for World War I. The Home Rule Bill was not going to include the 6 counties that are now in Northern Ireland. In 1916, the Easter Rising was put down, and the Easter Rising was by men wanting a Republic of Ireland, and it was brutally counteracted by the British government. After World War I, Sinn Féin declared an Irish Republic, which the British government did not recognise. The Anglo-Irish War broke out between the British Army and the IRA in 1919 to 21, and that led to an Anglo-Irish treaty. Ireland then became a dominion known as the Irish Free State, which allowed the 6 counties in the north to opt out, which they did, and this is the partition of Ireland. The Irish Civil War between the pro-treaty forces who were happy with that Anglo-Irish treaty and the anti-treaty forces lasted from 1922 to 23. Meanwhile, Northern Ireland consolidated its existence, and because they used a first-past-the-post system, it led to it being dominated by the Ulster Unionist Party, who wanted, obviously, to remain with Britain. By 1948, Southern Ireland had become a republic, and Northern Ireland had had its own devolved government and parliament since 1922, which lasted to 1972. This is known as the Stormont Ascendancy, after the Stormont building where the Northern Irish Parliament is. By the late 1960s, the nationalist communities in Northern Ireland felt they were being discriminated against by the Protestants and Unionists. The trouble started in the 60s. It was between the Provisional IRA, which are different from the original IRA, and the Ulster Volunteer Force, or the UVF, but also the Royal Ulster Constabulary, the RUC, and the British Army were involved at various points as well. There was serious rioting between 1966 and 70, which was stirred up partly by the civil rights movement in the USA and around the world. Harold Wilson sent the British Army in 1970, which had been requested by the Northern Irish government, and Edward Heath introduced internment, which was imprisonment without trial. Derek Murphy says this is a major tactical mistake. It's also ineffective as security measures. It didn't really protect people that much and alienated nationalists, and a lot of people were wrongly interned. Heath jeopardised the Tory Unionist link by bringing in direct rule from Westminster and suspended the Stormont Parliament. In January 1972, on a Sunday called Bloody Sunday afterwards, 26 unarmed civil rights protesters were shot by the British Army. 14 of them were killed. There have been 2 investigations into this Bloody Sunday, the first of which, just after, didn't lay the blame at the British Army. The second one, which was quite recent, did lay the blame at the British Army and said it was unjustified and unjustifiable. In 1973 there was a referendum in Northern Ireland as to who the people of Northern Ireland wanted to belong to, which is known as a border poll. 98.9% of those who voted wanted to stay in the Union. However, that was 57.5% overall, as only 1% of Catholics voted. In 1973, the Sunningdale Agreement was negotiated, and it was a complex plan for power sharing in the Northern Ireland Assembly. 78 seats which were going to be elected by proportional representation. This was to replace the Stormont Parliament and not be so dominated by the Ulster Unionist Party. It was to include cross-border links with the Republic of Ireland, a Council of Ireland, and it's supported by moderate Unionists and Nationalists and the British and Irish governments. However, the Unions rejected it as they didn't want the South to have any say in running the North, and the Ulster Workers' Council organised a general strike against it. Heath then lost the 1974 general election, and when Wilson came to power he lacked the power in what was a hung parliament to deal with the issue. So in the late 70s the Provisional IRA settled in for a long war with bombs, car bombs and snipers etc, with some highly visible successes. For example, Thatcher's advisor Erin Eve and the Queen's cousin Lord Mountbatten. Internment was ended in 1976.